My name is Haley Monroe. That day it was a cold, rainy afternoon and the train station was packed. Everyone kept their heads down, eyes glued to their phones, until a woman in an old military uniform was shoved to the ground on the wet stone floor, coffee spilling all over her. But that Christmas Eve it was my own son, Jamie, 8 years old, who called 911. Not to ask for help, but to order a cheese pizza. He whispered into the receiver, "She said if I tell, the angel will cut out my tongue." That was the moment the entire police station held its breath. I thought Jamie was safe staying with Aunt Miriam, the woman who once stood at the church pulpit preaching love and grace. Her voice was sharp and cold. "Don't meddle in other people's business." So wrong that when police officers opened the basement door of the church, even the pastor standing beside them stepped back in horror. Have you ever trusted someone so completely only to find out they were the one hurting what you held most dear? If this story touches something deep inside you, leave a comment. Hit like if you've ever felt powerless. And don't forget to subscribe, because what I'm about to share, no one in my family has dared to speak of since that day. I met Miriam for the first time on a damp spring morning, just 2 weeks after Ryan's funeral. Walter Quinn, what the press called a symbol of justice for the state of Illinois, always sat at the head of the table, silverware perfectly placed, his manner so polished that even the way he dabbed his mouth with a napkin seemed to carry authority. My mother, Elaine, rarely made eye contact when she spoke, but she'd still wait for others to nod before continuing. I didn't argue. I learned to nod early. Every cell in my body felt worn out. I wasn't eating, sleeping, or even breathing properly inside that house where Ryan's aftershave still lingered, where his hair still clung to the jacket hanging by the door. Jamie was just 6, and I thought if she, my husband's sister, wanted to help, then maybe that was a good thing. The first few months, Miriam came by every Sunday without fail, taking Jamie to church and then stopping by the corner ice cream shop. I was loved because I kept things in order. I used to watch from the window as Jamie looked up at her, listening to stories about saints and light and the path to salvation. At 19 I decided to enlist. No one in my family had ever served and they saw it as an act of defiance. My father called it an impulsive, reckless decision, while my mother just sighed and said she'd rather play in the dirt than sit at a negotiation table. But I didn't go to rebel. I went because I needed to know who I was beyond that long dining table. In the military I didn't stand out, but I held steady. One time he drew wings tied to a fence with messy writing underneath, "Not allowed to fly." I asked him, "Jamie, what are you drawing?" He just shook his head. "Auntie says I'm not allowed to tell." I should have paid attention then. But I lied to myself. But the people who survived, they knew. I told myself, "Haley, don't overreact." Until one day everything ended. A few weeks later I found Jamie curled in the corner of his bed, blanket over his head, eyes wide open staring into the dark. When I gently pulled the blanket down he flinched. "Mom, don't turn on the light," he whispered. "Auntie says light isn't for the guilty." I just remember handing in my report on time that morning, and by nightfall, I was summoned to the office and ordered off the unit for internal security reasons. No explanation. Jamie lowered his head, scratching the edge of his pillow. "I don't know, but I asked too many questions, and asking too much is wrong." I held him tight, but he didn't hold me back. His small eyes looked at me like I was the one who didn't understand what was really happening. I started noticing more. They heard "dismissed from her unit," and filled in the blanks. "Well," my mother said as I set my luggage down in the living room, "you were never built for pressure." My father didn't even look at me. Not like anyone's home I'd ever known. His skin was dry and irritated. One day I saw a long red mark on his back. He said he fell, but when I asked further, he went silent, stared out the window and crumpled the paper he was holding. That's when I felt it. I just walked upstairs, back into the bedroom of my childhood, where a photo of my high school basketball trophy still hung and the dolls on the shelves remained untouched. But again I did the worst thing a mother could do. I doubted myself. I thought I was being overly sensitive from losing Ryan. No one wanted to know. And most of all, I thought if something was truly wrong, Jamie would tell me. I didn't know Miriam had already taught my son how to stay silent. One afternoon, I arrived earlier than usual to pick up Jamie. The church gate was open, the hallway lights dim. I stepped inside and called out, but no one answered. As I got closer to the old Bible study room, I heard Miriam's voice, low and steady, Weakness is the voice of the devil. Every holiday, I sat at the corner of the dining table listening to my mother brag about Colton's achievements. A TV interview, a commencement speech at the law school, a visit to a precinct where he was praised for caring about the community. I ate in silence, smiling thinly when someone asked, "Gabriella still teaching at that school?" Silence is proof of faith. I didn't hear Jamie reply, just the sound of someone breathing hard. No one ever asked if I was okay. I turned away and told myself they were rehearsing for a Christmas play. The way to survive in a family where every role was cast from the start. That night, Jamie sat in the corner of the living room painting with watercolors. The picture was a church with no doors, only windows that were nailed shut. On the roof was an angel with no wings, head bowed. He outlined it in black, then carefully wrote beneath, "I stayed silent." I didn't know why I reacted instinctively. Maybe the part of me that once wore the uniform wasn't dead. I was afraid of the answer. If I hadn't ignored all those signs. If I had just listened to Jamie a little sooner. If I had trusted my instincts instead of the image Miriam built for everyone to see. The perfect sister-in-law, a woman of God, a light in the dark. Maybe Jamie wouldn't have had to call 911, just to feel a little warmth. And it was that very night, amid the soft hum of ventilators at the hospital, that I got the call that shattered my world into ashes. But in a way none of us, my family or I, were ready for. They led me out of the station through a side exit into a dark garage, no explanations, just a single sentence, "You need to speak with Agent Keller." By then I couldn't feel the rain or the cold, only the coffee still clinging to my shoes from when I lifted Serena up. The police lights swirled slowly in the quiet night, casting red and blue glows against the old brick wall behind the chapel. It didn't look like the place Jamie once told me God lives in. It looked cold. They brought me into a windowless room, a ceiling light casting everything in sharp relief like something out of a movie. Soulless. I hadn't even stepped out of my car when a heavily coated officer rushed over. "Gabriella Quinn," he said, voice low but not unkind, making me sit straighter as if under inspection. "I'm Agent Keller. Do you know why you're here?" "I'm guessing it has something to do with the woman I helped earlier," I answered. "Her name's Serena." He nodded, unsurprised. "Serena Blake." The basement door was old metal, rust blooming like dried blood around its edges. When it creaked open, a wave of damp, stale air hit me hard. "Her file is sealed at the highest level, accessible only to individuals appointed by the Inspector General." I stayed quiet, trying to keep my breathing even. "So, what's going on?" Keller leaned forward, arms resting on the table, voice lower. "We've been tracking Serena for months. Not because she's a suspect. Because she's carrying something certain people want erased from history." He just whispered in a hoarse voice. "Mum," I told. I broke the rule. I shook. I wanted to scoop him up, take him far from that freezing basement, but Jamie held tight to his drawing, eyes fixed on something invisible in the corner of the room. A female officer stepped beside me, shining her flashlight around. No heat. It was encrypted using an old protocol, one only used in units that have long been disbanded. "And that signal led to me?" I asked, incredulous. Keller studied me, weighing what to reveal. "Surveillance at the station showed you were the only one who stepped forward when Serena fell." I reached for the lock, scratched and worn, and opened it. Inside it was empty. But taped across the inner door were rows of yellow sticky notes, inked in tiny black handwriting. I pulled one off. December 12th. Spoke without permission. December 13th. Asked why. December 14th. Looked out window during prayer. Another officer brought out Jamie's gray backpack. I recognized it instantly. It was the one I bought him at the start of the school year. Worn now, but I'd always kept it clean. In the front pocket they found a small notebook wrapped in plastic, a sticker of a cross on the front. It was labeled, "Jamie Monroe's Correction Log." I couldn't believe it. I opened each page. Every line listed a sin, carefully recorded with a signature below, "Repented, signed, Miriam." Some days, Jamie had written up to 8 offenses, from breathing too loud to thinking about mom during Bible study. Police collected everything as evidence. All I could do was hold Jamie close, feel his ice-cold body, his ribs pressing into me as his chest rose and fell like he'd just run a mile. His hands still clenched the drawing. I gently peeled it back. An angel curled up, wings cut and taped. Below it read, "If I speak, mommy will burn." My eyes blurred. I tried to stay calm, breathing deep so I wouldn't cry. Not now. Not in front of Jamie. A soft voice from behind said, "We'll need to bring him in for a checkup and some basic questions. But he's safe now." I nodded, lifting Jamie into my arms. He wrapped his arms weakly around my neck, bones sharp and trembling. As we passed through the basement door, Jamie turned his head, glanced back and whispered, "Mom, God doesn't live there." I held my child tightly without answering, because there are no words that could possibly contain everything I was feeling. At the police station, I sat on a cold bench, Jamie curled up beside me, a thin blanket draped over his body. In front of me was a stack of documents just printed from my son's backpack. The shaky, childlike handwriting cut into my mind like a dull blade. An officer sat across from me, speaking gently, Haley, I can't say for sure what happens next, but what we found, this is serious. Family or not, church or not, no child should live like that." I clenched my fists so tightly my nails pierced into my palms. Jamie's words echoed in my head. I broke the rules. I was beginning to understand. Not God's law. Not scripture. But Miriam's law. A world where silence is called faith, where fear is disguised as salvation. Keller placed a small envelope on the table. "This is the photo Serena gave us before she cut off all contact." I walked into the interrogation room with my hands numb from how tightly I had been squeezing them. I opened it. A blurry image, captured at an angle from a ceiling camera. I was walking through a dark hallway carrying a metal box. She wore a cream-colored knit sweater draped over her shoulders, a skirt below the knee, her hands resting lightly on a dark brown leather handbag neatly placed on the table. She turned when I entered, tilted her head slightly and offered a thin smile. "Haley," she said, her voice light like wind chimes, "you look exhausted." I gripped the photo. What am I supposed to do now? Jamie will be fine. And if what she's carrying is real, then this isn't just about the past. I stood across the table, keeping just enough distance to stop myself from dragging my nails across the cold wood. "What do you have to say about what just happened?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Miriam exhaled like she was explaining something too simple. "I saved that child's soul. He was lost. Full of grief, doubt, disorientation. I did what was necessary to bring him back to the right path. You locked him in a basement. No heat. No food. No one around. And I knew, if I said yes, I'd be stepping into a place with no way back." She frowned slightly, her smile shifting into pity. "I didn't lock anyone. He had his own space to pray, to be cleansed. No force involved. Just the silence that's necessary." I took a step back. In every word she spoke, there wasn't a trace of remorse. Not a sign she understood that Jamie wasn't a soul in need of cleansing. He was a child in need of protection. Just then, a man entered the room. I recognized him immediately. Kenneth Hale, lead pastor at the church where Miriam taught. The man who had preached to hundreds about forgiveness, faith, and unconditional love. "Alpha 17 Station. Monroe," he nodded politely, his voice deep and composed. "I'll be representing Miriam in this matter. She is a devoted woman, committed to the community, and I believe we can resolve this in a civil manner." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Civil? A child locked in a basement for 30 hours, alone, no light, no food. And you call that something we can resolve civilly? He kept the gentle smile, but his eyes were ice. "There may be misunderstandings. Jamie is grieving the loss of his father. Emotional disturbances can distort perception. We're very sorry if he felt unsafe." I slammed my hand on the table. "Felt? He's not imagining this. We have drawings, audio recordings of him talking about being locked up, notebooks where she made him list his sins every day. This is real." Miriam didn't flinch. "Jamie is a soul that needs guidance. You've never understood salvation, Haley. You always believed in doctors, in medication, in logic. But the soul needs something else. Something you've never had the faith to feel." I stared at her for a long moment. I don't need faith to know a child shouldn't be trembling in the dark, shouldn't say that if he speaks, his mother will burn. That's not salvation, Miriam. That's cruelty. A city legal officer knocked on the door, signaling for me to come sign a few statement forms. I left the room, my heart still pounding but my mind clearer than ever. She wasn't afraid. Not one bit. A few hours later, when I got home, an email was already waiting in my inbox. It was from the official address of St. Harmony Church. I clicked it open. Serena nodded slightly. Harmony Church rejects the unfounded accusations against Mrs. Miriam Hale, a dedicated member who has tirelessly contributed to our community. We believe her actions stem from a place of love and divine guidance. Haley Monroe's allegations appear overly emotional and may damage the church's reputation and community trust. And I stood there watching. Not a single line mentioned Jamie. No concern. No curiosity about what actually happened. But I know, he never came back. I looked at the USB lying between us like a glowing object in the dark. What about me? Asked my voice lower. What did I see? That night as I held Jamie to sleep, he still clutched his drawing. A wingless angel beneath a church dome sealed shut with nothing but darkness inside. Serena tilted her head. I don't know for sure. Later that night, after putting Jamie to bed, I returned to the living room where his belongings were still scattered in the gray backpack the police had returned. I sat on the floor pulling scraps of fabric from the bottom. A teddy bear with one ear ripped and stitching coming loose at the leg. I was about to sew it back when I noticed something hard beneath the stuffing. I reached inside. A small cold plastic object brushed my fingers. A black USB drive, unlabeled, wrapped in worn silver duct tape. No, Serena said softly. They made you forget. The chill down my spine wasn't from the winter. Jamie had hidden it there, because he was afraid adults would find it. And the adult he feared was someone I once considered family. They took me underground, no lights, no nameplate. The screen lit up in the kitchen's dim light. The yellow glow fell on the wooden table, soft but not enough to ease the pounding in my chest. Inside the USB were 6 audio files, each dated in reverse, from 10 days ago to Christmas Eve. I put on my headphones, hands trembling, and clicked the first file. A faint static. Then breathing. Jamie. His voice was soft, like a whisper, like he was hiding under a blanket. If I record this, maybe someone will believe me. I miss Mom. There was something in her gaze, quiet, urgent, unwavering, that made it impossible to walk away. Auntie says only weak kids cry. I closed my eyes, my chest heavy. The boy's long sigh stretched like every breath hurt. You should be, she replied, unflinching. Because the truth isn't just painful. Miriam's voice came through, calm but stern. Kneel. I picked up the USB, the cold metal biting into my hand. Those who can't control their tongue are unworthy of hearing the Lord. A thud, something hard hitting the floor. But somewhere deep in my heart I knew, something inside me had woken up. Please don't make me anymore. God, please tell her to stop. I ripped the headphones off for a moment. I stepped inside, didn't even take off my coat before my mother's voice rang from the living room, sharp as a blade. I wanted to scream, to smash something, but the only sounds in the kitchen were the wall clock and Jamie's steady breathing in the next room. I hit play on the next file. Footsteps echoed down a hallway. Miriam was speaking to someone, her voice calm like a lesson. Pain purifies sin. How do you know? I asked softly. You can't be reborn without enduring. Discipline is the fire that leads to light. I opened a browser and typed in the sermon title. The phrase rebirth through discipline Kenneth Hale led me to the St. Harmony Church website. Under weekly sermons, I saw the title, Rebirth Through Suffering, God Tests Those He Loves. The audio file ran nearly 50 minutes. Kenneth's voice was steady, low, almost hypnotic. We suffer not because God abandons us, he said, but because he is refining our souls like fire purifies gold. I kept listening. Children, if they are unruly inside, must be quieted through silence. And if it takes limiting them physically to save their soul, then do so with silent love. I rose from the chair. The air in the house felt thick. I wasn't just facing a woman who had abused my child. I was facing a system. I gave a dry laugh. You mean I hold no value as a public figure? A church built not only from bricks and mortar, but from the silence of adults who thought discipline meant bruises and holiness meant isolation. She shot up from her seat. Don't you dare compare yourself to your brother. Jamie's voice came through, faint and trembling. I'll try not to cry. I promise. Every word she flung at me echoed with a familiar ache, the kind that comes from being the forgotten shadow in a perfectly curated family portrait. I missed the light. Then the sound of a lock clicking. When I opened my bag, I saw a thick envelope tucked neatly inside a side pocket. A long, hollow silence. And nothing else. I got up and stepped onto the porch. The sky was still snow-heavy, streetlights casting their glow across rooftops like a false moon. The message was direct. I was being warned for unverified public statements, actions that could cause severe damage to community image and family credibility, and was advised to cease all contact and distribution of information related to any federal personnel under investigation. My son had hidden an entire world inside something I thought was just a simple toy. He hadn't just endured, he had tried to leave behind a trail. It was up to me to read the language. I returned to the table, placed my hand on the USB still plugged into the laptop. The weight I felt wasn't just pain anymore. It was responsibility. Something shifted inside me that night, quietly but permanently. Because if they thought my son would stay silent forever, they picked the wrong mother to fight. I never imagined I'd be sitting across from a lawyer, holding a court order signed by my ex-husband's daughter under the line that read, "Petitioner seeks full legal guardianship." I read every line again and again, unable to believe my eyes. Miriam wasn't just denying everything Jamie had been through. He was fighting back. In her petition, she claimed I was mentally unstable, that I was using grief over my husband's death to blame his family, and worst of all, that I was manipulating my son with false stories to destroy the church's reputation. Attached was an unofficial psychological evaluation, recommended by Pastor Kenneth, suggesting that I exhibited emotional extremism and delusional tendencies during periods of stress. I let out a dry laugh when I got to that part. They were using my suffering to rewrite the narrative and make me the villain. My attorney, Mrs. Anderson, an older woman with a sharp voice and eyes that missed nothing, sat across from me in a small room with faint sunlight pouring through the window. "This is a common strategy," she said, setting down her teacup. "They can't disprove the physical evidence, so they go after the mother's mind. Make you look unreliable." I stayed silent. All I could think of was Jamie's face that morning when I received the court papers. "They're gonna use your old medical file." He just quietly handed me a new drawing. It was an angel. But the wings weren't cut, they were hooked up by wires suspended in midair. The angel's face had no eyes. Just a blank, white space. "What is it, Jamie?" I asked. "I dreamed it," he whispered. "They said if I tell the truth you'll be taken away. And if you're taken away, the angel won't be let down anymore." I pulled him close, my chest aching like someone was tearing muscle from bone. I whispered, "No one's taking me anywhere. I'm here. I see you. I believe you." He nodded, but his little hand still clutched the drawing like a fragile talisman. 2 days later, during a meeting with Child Protective Services, the air turned heavy the moment I walked in. The room was small, with gray-painted walls, a thin wooden table, 2 cold metal chairs, and a blonde woman around 50 reviewing my file. "I'm Marcia Blake, lead coordinator on Jamie Monroe's case," she said, eyes never leaving the pages. "We've reviewed both sides. Some of the evidence you submitted is quite serious. But," she paused, flipping a page, "there are also notable claims from Mrs. Miriam Hale, legal relative, former temporary guardian, and someone of high standing in the community." I raised my head. "The evidence I submitted includes audio recordings, drawings my son made daily, and medical reports confirming injuries. What do they have?" "A few words and a religious reputation." Marcia didn't respond right away. She just looked at me as if weighing something deeper than any document. After the meeting ended, I stepped into the hallway when a younger woman in a light gray CPS jacket called after me. She spoke softly, almost in a whisper. "I know you're not making this up. I've reviewed the whole file. You should know, this isn't the first complaint about that church. But," she paused, glancing quickly at the office door, "they disappear. Every single one." I looked at her, speechless. My throat tightened. "I can't say this officially," she whispered. "But don't stop. They only stay powerful if we stay quiet." I stepped out of the building. The wind hit my face hard, but inside me there was a fire growing. I wasn't just fighting a woman hiding behind the word love. I was fighting a machine. where reputation replaced justice and a child's pain was treated like background noise. And I knew if I didn't keep going, Jamie would always live in that shadow. An angel without eyes, without a voice. And no one would believe in wings bound by the hooks of prejudice and lies. I had just laid Jamie down for a nap when there was a knock at the door. The sound wasn't hurried or forceful, just enough to let me know the person outside wasn't there out of curiosity. A woman in her 60s stood there. Her short silver hair was neatly combed, like she still held on to old habits of order even if time had changed everything else. She held a small paper bag, and her gaze, it wasn't sharp or judgmental. It was the kind of look only someone who had lived through pain could give to another. "Are you Haley?" she asked. "I'm Linda Carmichael. I used to be a member of St. Harmony Church." I invited her in. She sat in a wooden chair near the kitchen, placing the bag on the table. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Just the hum of the heater and the ticking wall clock filled the silence. "I know what's happening to you, to Jamie," she said, her voice raspy like it had been forced to stay quiet for too long. "And I can't keep sitting on my hands anymore." I looked at her, not daring to hope, but not ready to shut down if what she was about to say could bring me closer to the truth. "My daughter Mallory is 22 now," she began. "But 10 years ago, when she was 12, I brought her to the church's youth program. Pastor Kenneth and Miriam ran the faith training sessions every Saturday evening." I nodded slightly. That phrase wasn't unfamiliar. I'd seen it marked in blue ink on Miriam's office calendar, right below the line that read, "Pathway to Salvation." Linda swallowed. "One evening, Mallory came home with bruises on her wrist. She said she fell playing sports. But a few days later, I heard her sobbing in her room, whispering, 'I don't deserve love. I haven't been quiet enough.'" Her voice faltered. I said nothing. Just waited. My husband told me not to dig. Said maybe Mallory was just being sensitive. But I know my daughter. She never said things like that before. Linda opened the paper bag and pulled out a carefully wrapped folder in old, stained plastic. The black cover was worn, frayed at the edges like it had been hidden for a very long time. She placed it in front of me. "I got this from someone inside. Someone who left the church after seeing too much. This is a copy. The original is locked up tight." I opened the folder. Inside were structured pages labeled, "Spiritual Cleansing Program, Training Levels A through D." I flipped through the names. Each page listed children. Alongside were dates, behavior notes, and discipline recommendations. There were columns for reaction level, resistance expression, and repetition count. I stopped on page 12. Third line down. Jamie Monroe, Level B, shows signs of anxiety, frequent questioning, unstable faith. Recommendation: isolation plus private sermon plus 72-hour silent discipline. I froze. My whole body went cold even in the warmth of the kitchen. "My son's name," I said, my voice scraped raw like it had been dragged across a wire fence. Linda nodded slowly. "I know." I kept watching in silence when Jamie's name showed up on the list. I thought those things had ended. But when I heard he'd been locked in the basement, I realized they never stopped. I turned the next page. In red ink, a note scribbled in the margin. "Special program initiated, Miriam in charge. No need to notify parents." I clenched my fist. These weren't educational notes. They were surveillance logs. Punishment schedules dressed up in the language of faith. I shot to my feet. "Who are you?" Linda looked up, her eyes clouded but burning with fire. I tried. 3 years ago, I filed a complaint with the local police department. Let it end here before someone else disappears. They said there was no physical evidence. They said the training sessions were part of a religious-based educational program, with no signs of coercion. And then, the records disappeared. The person who originally held the notebook had to leave town. She paused, then added, "And I was excommunicated by the church." I held the folder close to my chest, hands still trembling. Jamie was asleep in the next room, unaware that his name had once been listed as a soul in need of cleansing. I looked Linda in the eye. "Would you be willing to testify?" She didn't hesitate. "I've been waiting for someone brave enough to drag them into the light. No fancy podium, no flags flanking the walls, no branded backdrop." I nodded. At that moment, I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt rage. I felt resolve. Because if the truth could be killed by silence, then we, me and people like Linda, would bring it back with our voices. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table holding a cold cup of tea, staring at the black laptop screen reflecting the soft yellow light from above. Jamie had already fallen into a deep sleep, clutching his old teddy bear, his face peaceful at times, tense at others, like fear still lingered in his dreams. My voice echoed in the slightly empty room like it was bouncing off the walls back at me. I'm not here today to cause a scene. An unknown number. Someone who once collapsed in a train station in silence and no one stepped in to help. About the moment she lay on the cold tile floor, military ID beside her, and how no one bent down except me. About the USB she handed me, the documents I never got the chance to release, and her sudden disappearance. This is Hannah Monroe, 911 dispatcher. I was the one who took the Christmas Eve call from your son. I sat up straight, heart pounding. Sorry to call so late, but there's something I thought you should know. We just finished processing the call audio for archival and internal training. During that process, a section that was previously garbled due to signal interference was successfully restored. And now it's quite clear. I stayed silent. My palms started to sweat. I can send you the file if you consent, Hannah continued. But I want to warn you, the content, it's not easy to hear. I need to, I said, my voice rough with tension. A few minutes later, the email came in. One audio file just over 2 minutes long. I put on my headphones, opened the laptop, and hit play. Jamie's voice came first, whispering as if hiding under a table or curled up in a corner. Can I order pizza for my mom? I promise I won't talk too much anymore. A long silence. Then a quiet exhale. If I die in here, will God still take me? My heart clenched. Then came a low, slow voice in the distance. A soft cough. I shivered at the next words. The defiant shall learn silence in fire, so that on the day of rebirth, their soul will know reverence. It was Kenneth. Pastor Kenneth Hale. I replayed that segment 3 times. It couldn't be anyone else. A small group followed, rising from their chairs, footsteps quick like they couldn't get out of that heavy air fast enough. His voice echoed in a confined space like a basement. No other footsteps. No other voices. Just Jamie and him. I removed the headphones. The kitchen fell utterly still. The refrigerator hummed behind me, but beyond that, the world seemed to freeze. I turned on the office light and pulled out the case file I'd prepared with Mrs. Anderson. Then I forwarded the audio to her encrypted inbox. Almost immediately my phone rang. I just listened. Anderson's voice came through, sharp and steady. We now have evidence not just of psychological abuse, but of the direct involvement of a religious authority. But we cannot let false claims destroy a family's honor, or a nation's. I want to make it public, I said. No more locking this away in filing cabinets. Not one more time. He paused for a beat. I'll file an emergency motion with the state attorney's office. I only remember collapsing on a stone bench behind the building, wind cutting through my tangled hair, the sound of passing traffic fading into the distance. Early the next morning, I was at Mrs. Anderson's office. In my hand was a printed transcript of the audio, complete with timestamps and the original call, Idaho. My heart didn't break like it does in movies. It just sank heavy like stone, dragging my whole body down into silence. Are you sure? She asked. Once this is out there, there's no turning back. They'll come after you hard. I'm not looking for a way out, I replied. I'm looking for a straight road, with justice leading the way. Before noon, a reporter from an independent paper in Des Moines contacted me. They'd previously published investigations into religious institutions abusing power. I sent them everything: the audio, the transcript, photos, and a copy of the Black Ledger from Linda Carmichael. Not long after, the state attorney's office replied. They agreed to convert the closed-door hearing the next day into a public trial, citing matters of significant concern to community welfare and the safety of minors. I stood in front of the posted notice at the local government center and I felt no fear. Not anymore. That night, as I brushed Jamie's hair, he looked at me in the mirror and asked quietly, "Are you going to tell the truth in court, Mom?" I paused, kissed the top of his head. Not just me, Mrs. Anderson. I just know every shirt, every notebook, every old photo went into my bag like clockwork. mechanical, numb. After the press conference, the fake video, the cold statement from my own brother, I had no reason left to stay in this city. Jamie looked up, his eyes softer than usual. Then maybe God will hear me now. I wrapped my arms around him. I didn't know where God stood in all of this, but I knew someone would be listening. The atmosphere in the courtroom that morning was as thick as the winter fog still clinging to the streets outside. I sat next to Jamie, holding his hand tightly beneath the table. He wore a white button-down shirt and his blue jacket, the one he always called his superhero coat. His eyes didn't look away, but I could see his breathing was slower than usual. He was trying to stay strong. Miriam sat across from us, her expression smooth and unreadable. Her hair was neatly styled, lips painted a pale orange, a soft pink cardigan draped over her shoulders as if this were a church gathering, not a custody trial. Beside her sat her attorney, a man in his 50s wearing a brown suit and round glasses, his voice smooth and polished like silk. But I heard every hook behind his words. My client, Mrs. Miriam Hale, has cared for young Jamie with rare love and devotion in the absence of his father. The accusations brought forth by Ms. Haley Monroe, though emotionally compelling, lack independent verification and may stem from an unstable mental state following the traumatic loss of her husband. I could feel the chills spreading across my chest. Jamie squeezed my hand harder. I didn't look at him. We kept our eyes forward, waiting for our turn. Attorney Anderson stood up and slowly placed a thick file on the stand. Your Honor, we are not here to present a motion. We are here with evidence. She turned to the court clerk and gave a subtle nod. The projector came on. The first image on the screen, a scanned copy of Jamie's drawing. An angel with wings pierced by wire, hollow eyes, and a church in the background with no doors. Jamie didn't say a word, but I saw his shoulders tense. Miriam's attorney immediately objected. A child's drawing should not be considered admissible evidence. The judge raised his hand to interrupt. We will consider all materials in full context. The next piece of evidence was the audio recording from Christmas Eve. Jamie's voice barely more than a whisper. If I die in here, will God still take me? Followed by Kenneth Hale's voice. The rebellious will learn silence in fire. The entire courtroom fell silent. No sound of pens tapping, no rustling of papers. Only a faint exhale from someone seated behind us. I glanced at Miriam. She maintained a polite smile, but her throat twitched. Her fingers clutched her purse and began to fidget. Attorney Anderson continued, and now we call Mrs. Linda Carmichael. Linda stepped to the witness stand with straight shoulders and a steady voice, like someone who had waited a decade for this moment. She spoke of her own daughter, of what she had witnessed, of the formal complaint that was ignored, and the black ledger that contained a list of children marked for cleansing. A clerk placed a copy in front of the judge. As soon as Linda finished, Pastor Kenneth shot up from the back row. I object. I demand to speak on behalf of the congregation. Sit down, Mr. Hale, the judge said, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. I cannot allow these slanderous accusations to tarnish the Lord's name. Bailiff, remove him, the judge ordered, needing no further explanation. 2 security officers moved in. Kenneth turned, his eyes flicking past Jamie like a shadow. But Jamie didn't look down. He lifted his chin and met his gaze. After the doors closed behind him, the judge turned to me and Attorney Anderson. Anyone else wish to speak? I was about to say no when Jamie suddenly stood. He slipped his hand from mine and walked up to the witness stand. The courtroom held its breath. The judge dipped his head slightly. Would you like to say something, Jamie? Jamie nodded. I can. A court clerk adjusted the microphone. Jamie stood on his toes until his mouth was level with it. He took a deep breath. I prayed in the dark, he said, voice clear. But my mom showed up. And I'm not scared now. I saw the judge tilt his head slightly. His hand rested gently on the file in front of him. He said nothing for 10 seconds. Then he lowered his hand and spoke with finality. After reviewing all case files, witness testimony, and submitted evidence, this court declares full legal custody to Mrs. Haley Monroe. A permanent restraining order is issued against Mrs. Miriam Hale, covering all direct and indirect forms of contact. The sound of the gavel striking the bench echoed 3 times. Clear. Undeniable. Jamie turned to me, eyes bright, then ran straight into my arms. I held him tightly, listening to his heartbeat pressed against my chest. I didn't look over at Miriam. I didn't need to see how she reacted. At that moment, I only knew one thing. Finally, the voice of a child had broken through the wall of lies. 1 month after the trial, my house finally returned to its familiar rhythm. No more phones ringing off the hook, no more clicking of recording devices, no more lawyer meetings or police knocking on the door at dusk. Just the sound of Jamie giggling when he poked my back while I was making breakfast, or the scratch of crayons drawing swirls of orange across blank paper on the kitchen table. I still kept the case file in a small wooden box, locked with an old latch. Not to forget, but to keep from being haunted. The truth had been spoken. Jamie was learning to trust the world again. This morning he brought me his latest drawing. An angel standing tall, wings stretched nearly across the entire width of the paper. No more wires. No more iron cage. Behind it, the sun, round, brilliant yellow, casting steady light over every stroke. I drew this for you, Jamie said. This time the angel isn't being held back. I ran my hand through his hair and nodded. Thank you, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. We folded the drawing and placed it into a frame beside the window. The February breeze slipped through the cracks just enough to flutter the thin white curtain, and I realized, in the lingering chill of winter, something new was beginning to bloom. That afternoon, while I was sorting through my email inbox, a message appeared. Subject: about my son, please keep anonymous. Then another. And another. 35 emails in 2 days. Most came from people I had never heard of. All of them were parents. Some had once been part of St. Harmony. Others came from churches under the same system. One wrote, "My son was forced to kneel for 3 hours in a classroom just for asking a question about the Bible. I wanted to speak up, but my husband told me to stay quiet, said don't go against the church." Another shared, "My daughter was only 10. I want to read a message. She said red was the color of sinners. I still don't know what happened in that room. I read every word. Not a single letter was light. I looked directly at the committee. But each was a piece of the truth that had been missing. A name tied to power, law, and reputation." I looked up at him, then toward the window where the evening light touched the picture frame. I stood, took my notebook from the drawer, flipped to the first blank page. I began to write everything down. No omissions. No softening. No shielding anyone's reputation. I wrote with every bit of pain, every shaking hand, every ounce of love I had for Jamie, and the justice every child deserves. I wrote through the night. She wore dark civilian clothes. No insignia, no rank. For every child locked in silence. The woman once reported dead in an explosion near the border. Then I shut the laptop, stood and took a long, steady breath. The next morning, Jamie was already up. He had gone to the store with our neighbor early, and when he came back he was carrying a pizza box half his size. He set it on the table, opened the lid, and the scent of warm cheese filled the room. "I ordered pizza," Jamie said, eyes glowing. "This time it's not for the police." I laughed, my heart tightening and then opening like someone had lit it from the inside. Then she pulled out the real data drive. No larger than a button, wrapped in magnetic shielding. Jamie looked at me, grinning mischievously. "I didn't send this data out," Serena continued. "I kept it until someone brave enough would stand with me." I nodded, taking a bite of hot, gooey pizza. Outside, the sun was rising slowly, gold across the roof tiles, shining right onto the angel wings in the framed drawing. And I believed something simple. We were no longer eating in the dark. Our story, mine and my son's, might be just one small shard in the mosaic of silent pain still hidden behind walls that appear holy and proper. "Inside," she said, "is evidence of illegal operations carried out in the name of national defense. And truth, however painful, is the only thing that can break the chains forged by fear. Voices silenced for political security. Audio recordings of senior officers ordering the destruction of evidence to preserve campaign optics. Have you ever seen a child hurt by distorted beliefs? Have you ever doubted something but stayed quiet because people said you were too sensitive or overreacting?" Serena ended with a single sentence. "I'm here to speak, but she's the reason I showed up at all." What do you think is the line between faith and control? I'd truly love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe stories like this have the power to open hearts and start necessary conversations, in families, in communities, please hit follow on this channel. A reporter lowered his camera, his expression no longer one of a hunter chasing headlines, but of someone trying to grasp what he had just witnessed. We'll be back with more honest stories, sometimes intense, but always filled with love for those who've been left in the dark. No one applauded. No one needed to. Outside the hearing room, the afternoon in the Capitol was blanketed in a soft gray-gold light. But inside, everything had changed. I was no longer the person I used to be, Serena was no longer a ghost erased from the records, and the truth was no longer imprisoned in silence. What remained was us, and a voice that had finally returned. 1 year later, spring sunlight poured through the wide windows of a modest but warm conference room, shining onto the semicircle of chairs arranged at its center. Behind me hung a small fabric banner, rough-textured with hand-stitched white letters, Seat 27, a place for the uncounted. It wasn't a slogan. It wasn't a promise. Just a reminder that some people had once been erased from the system but they still deserved to be heard. I stood in the center of the room looking out at the faces in front of me, women of all ages with short hair, long hair, gray hair, dyed hair. Some in wheelchairs, some still wearing old uniforms. They were combat nurses, radar techs, supply sergeants, logistics coordinators. Some demoted for not fitting unit culture. Each one carried a memory no one else wanted to hold. To my left was Serena, wearing a gray shirt, her jacket draped over the back of her chair. The scar on her temple had faded, but her careful step remained. She had become the lead advisor of the organization this past year. A woman who disliked microphones but was always the last to leave every session. I don't know if I could have built Seat 27 without her. That workshop wasn't recorded. No live streams. No press statements. We called it a sharing circle, with one rule only. Speak if you want to, stay silent if you need to. An older woman named Marcia had just finished telling her story, forced out of the service for improper behavior toward a superior, when in truth she had confronted an officer for harassing a new recruit. She sat down, hands folded over her knees, her gaze steadier now than when she entered the room. A moment later I heard the soft clack of wheels against hardwood. A young woman in her 20s, jet black hair pinned neatly back, eyes sharp as coal, rolled her wheelchair toward the empty chair at the center of the circle. "Excuse me," she said quietly, then looked up at me. "That chair, who's it for?" I looked at the chair. A simple wooden seat, no nameplate, no sign. We always placed it there in the middle of the room like a silent ritual. I stepped forward, gently rested my hand on the armrest, then turned to her. "For the next person who chooses to stand," I said. "There's always someone who'll need it." She pressed her lips together, nodded faintly, then gripped the arms of her wheelchair like she had just drawn strength from the room itself. Her name was Kayla. A year ago, she had written asking for guidance, saying she'd been kicked out of her officer training program for reporting a commander's psychological manipulation. In her letter, she wrote, "I don't know if anyone's ever listened to someone like me, but if you know where I should begin, please point me to a place." I had replied with just one line, "Seat 27. Any Monday." And she came. Serena moved closer, quietly sitting beside me. She looked at Kayla, then around the room. Then, in a rare moment, she spoke. "I once thought I was the last," she said. "That no one else remembered, that no one else had the patience to keep what they tried to erase. But I was wrong." She turned to me and her eyes, once so guarded, now held something quiet, gratitude and something deeper. "I stood strong, because you stood first." I said nothing. I simply placed my hand over hers, not as a gesture of thanks, but as a way to steady myself against the rising tide of emotion. Across the room, a silver-haired woman quietly pulled out a handkerchief. Another gently patted her friend's knee. And at the center of the circle, the empty chair remained, quietly waiting for whoever might need it next. No one was forced to sit. But it was always there, just enough for someone to know. They had never truly been forgotten. What do you think about that empty chair in the center of the room? In your own family, workplace, or community, have there ever been chairs left vacant because someone wasn't heard, wasn't trusted, or wasn't protected? Have you ever found yourself standing outside the circle, just because you spoke a truth no one wanted to hear? I'm not telling this story for sympathy. I'm telling it because I know, out there somewhere, there are more Gabrielas, more Serenas. People who may seem small, but carry memories and truths powerful enough to shake a system. And only when we dare to speak just once, do we discover how many others have been quietly waiting for someone to go first. If you've ever witnessed or lived through something similar, share it in the comments. We read every word, and sometimes, a single story from you is enough to help someone else find their voice again. Don't forget to like and follow this channel, because there are still so many stories to be told here. Stories of family, courage, and truths once buried, now ready to be heard. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to speak, and everything begins to change.